I'm Trilobite Linden. I am a senior product manager at Linden Lab, and you are listening to the Drax Files Radio Hour with Joe Yardley.
One thing that I didn't ask you, why did you name yourself Trilobite?
A trilobite is a fossil. So it's a very specific type of creature that used to exist thousands of years ago. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a paleontologist, and I was a complete nerd over fossils. So I decided to stick with my nerdiness and brought it here to Linden.
Hello and welcome to the Drax Files Radio Hour with Joe Yardley. Again today without Joe Yardley because, as regular listeners know, I have a big deadline looming in my day job, which is November 10th, and then we go back to regular programming, as they say. So in the meantime, just one-on-one interviews without the other segmented pieces of the podcast. And today, as you heard in the station ID, Trilobite Linden, fairly new hire at Linden Lab, but someone who is not unfamiliar with Second Life, someone who has delved into digital storytelling in college and was introduced to Second Life back then in the college context. Also, Trilobite, a fan of machinima and other things. But we will be talking about all sorts of things because she actually works as a senior product manager only with Project Sansar at this point. So the rest, you know how you can support this show. Please do so. Take out a voluntary subscription as an individual or sponsor us on the quote-unquote corporate level. Oh yeah, lastly, Ruben Steiger, who was formerly with Linden Lab, was promised last week, but he's shifted 1 week. The interview is in the can, and I'll play it next week when I'm actually physically in Dublin at the Web Summit, where I hopefully will meet a bunch of Lindens and get some exclusive scoop, get them drunk on, what's that beer they have over there? Guinness. Right. So maybe I can kind of get the tongues a little loose in terms of Project Sansar, something I was not able to accomplish with Trilobite. Damn, she's good. So here she is talking a little bit about what a product manager is.
So a product manager's job is kind of to look at what features we should build next, to really think about our users and what features they're going to need to really get the most out of the experience.
And how do you find that out? I mean, when you're the product manager, you work with the team. What is your intuition telling you? Your own experience? How does that come in? Is maybe your own family outside of Linden Labs sort of guinea pigs sometimes?
You know, it can be a bit of both. I started my career out kind of doing user advocacy. So really being able to listen to user supports, interact with users in forums or in products, and really understanding what problems they were having with the product. And that just built in me a sense of really understanding your users and really listening with them closely. You also do a lot of things like testing and kind of trying out ideas and trying to kind of tease out what they need. There's a great Henry Ford quote I like to think about, which is, he said, if I had listened to my users exactly, I would have given them a faster horse. I always think that's interesting because, you know, he really productionized the car and what we think of as the car. So there's a little bit of grain of figuring out what does the user say they want and then what do they actually need, and hopefully getting a product that, you know, over delivers. Because if you give them exactly what they want, it's not always what they thought necessarily.
But that's so interesting because sometimes when I put my stuff, when I'm working on them and I put them out for feedback, it's kind of similar. It's like a double-edged sword because I do feel strongly about certain things. And then when feedback comes back that is kind of says, no, you really got to do in this other direction, then sometimes you're in a certain conflict. I mean, if you have a super user, let's say, who has a very strong opinion and you kind of value that opinion, but it completely is diametrically opposed to your own intuition and your experience, then what do you do?
It's definitely a hard problem. Part of it for me is using kind of design thinking and thinking, who are you designing for? So are you designing for a power user? If so, then their opinion and really understanding their needs matters. But if you're designing for the everyman, then the super user's opinion probably still matters, but it's not going to be exactly what you tweak your final product for.
Mm-hmm. And since we're dealing with stereotypes on this podcast now, you have to deal with engineers. And so the cliche, the stereotype is that they're not necessarily adept. And I can say this because I love engineers and I'm playing with stereotypes that I certainly don't believe wholeheartedly. Sometimes you come across an engineer that fits that stereotype, but 99% they don't. But how do you communicate to people who may or may not be maybe not in tune? I don't want to phrase it negatively. I mean, they're not front facing with the customer, but you kind of are, and so you have to translate it to these guys to implement that stuff.
It absolutely is a challenge, but I mean, end of the day, engineers are people, and they're often great people. And so I kind of have a philosophy of you should really empower your team and give them knowledge. So as much as possible, say, hey, here's the vision and where and why we think that's possible.
Linden Lab does have, though, and you're a new hire. I looked up your birth date in Second Life is June 2015. You're a noob, and let me tell you, and I certainly don't believe that because I have very good experiences interacting with Lindens, but Linden Lab does have a reputation that they do not listen to the user, that they don't understand the user. What would you say to people who think that?
You know, one thing that's really struck me that I think is really powerful here is so many of Linden's love and use Second Life. And it doesn't mean we get everything right, and it doesn't mean we always make the right decision. But I think there's so many people here who are so passionate about the product, and they're trying to do the right thing. Of course, there's a little recalculating we need to do sometimes, but I think there's a lot of passionate people who are trying to do the best they can. It's something they really feel close to, and I think it's something we hope we're doing with Project Sansar as well.
You are relatively new to Second Life in your Linden function. I'm just wondering how Second Life was introduced to you, or how did you hear about it?
I first heard about Second Life back in college when I was taking a class on digital media storytelling, which was just all sorts of weird ways of kind of figuring out how do you experiment with form, how do you tell stories in new media. It was the type of class where we told a story through email or did a webcomic or did a bunch of things just to see how different mediums played out. And one of the things we talked about was Second Life and how people kind of told stories within that. And I just find that really fascinating to think about how people use machinima or role-playing or different scenarios.
Oh, they talked about machinima too?
They did, yeah. It was a great class led by Tom Keeley, who's an amazing storyteller, and Adam Johnson, who recently went on to win a Pulitzer. So they really like kind of just experimenting with new media and seeing what that meant for storytelling.
So in another life, you wanted to become a journalist or a writer?
Yeah, I studied some creative writing back in school. I kind of took a Renaissance education, studied a little bit of computer science, a little bit of psychology, a little bit of creative writing. I mean, personally, it's just where my interests lie, and I've always kind of liked inhabiting that space where I learn a bunch of different things and kind of put them together. And I think it works great for my job now because a lot of my job is, working with engineering and understanding the technical needs, and it's understanding the business side, and it's going back to understanding the psychology and thinking of users.
In that class, what did you think of Second Life storytelling in role play? Did that make sense to you? Did that resonate with you at all as an approach, or did you just think it was all baloney? The reason I'm asking is a lot of people who told me that they were introduced to Second Life in college, they were really kind of turned off by the whole concept. When I then ask deeper, usually it's the teacher kind of not able to connect that topic to the student is usually the issue.
So for me, I think the thing that resonated with me is kind of the potential, and that's something I see in kind of digital platforms today. I don't think it's like a polished medium entirely. I don't think people know the rules of that. And what I mean by that is when people think of things like a novel, they think it's like this perfect format. But the truth is, if you read proto-novels or things that people spend, hundreds of years perfecting, things like inventing the chapter took time. So if you read early novels, you spend 80 pages without having a break, or you spend 7 pages reading descriptions because they don't have a sense of narrative. The same thing happened with film. Early films weren't long narratives. It took a time to develop the idea, what if we tell a long story? So figuring out with any new medium exactly what the rules and what resonates best with users takes time. And I felt like a lot of digital storytelling was kind of in those earlier phases where it's exploring what makes sense. Does this work? Does this not work? Sometimes it's chaotic and sometimes it works well and sometimes it doesn't, but it's a really interesting stage.
Well, you are in the perfect field then, because now VR, you got to kind of figure it out all over again. If it's VR film or whatever it is, if it's a game, where's the line of control versus letting go, or how do we even approach that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's something not everyone's going to get right. And I think you look at early VR storytelling now, and there's some things that are really exciting and some things that you're like, well, this hasn't quite been figured out yet. So I think it's a place where we all are as an industry and as creators, and it's absolutely going to change over the next couple of years and decades. And I think that's all going to be very exciting.
How do you become a product manager? Tell me a little bit about how the journey led you to Second Life. I mean, to Linden Lab, sorry.
Product managers are a really interesting kind of a fusion role. Like they take into account business needs, they take into account kind of design, and then they take into account kind of engineering. And they take into account kind of all these separate things to try and figure out what are we building and how are we building it. So they're not necessarily getting into the weeds of like the exact engineering and how the feature is exactly spec'd out, but they're saying it needs to accomplish these things. Here's kind of how we do it. I have some ideas. And then they work a ton cross-functionally. Because it's such a cross-functional role, everyone who does it has a little bit of a varied background. Like they may have a stronger business background, they may have a stronger engineering background. For me, I originally came out of user advocacy, but I've often worked in hybrid roles where I kind of do a little bit of engineering, do a little bit of business, kind of mix it all together, and hopefully you get something great out of it.
So it's like like a director on a movie. That the director kind of has to understand what certain departments are doing, but he cannot be the top guy, but he needs to be able to delegate it to that department.
Yeah, a lot of it is about having vision and then being able to coordinate with everyone, get everyone on the same page. End of the day, you aren't the only one whose opinions matter, but you're really the one who pushes forward the idea. So whatever you're doing is something you have to get the team on the same page about.
Now, with Project Sansa, you're facing the challenge that all these other VR companies are facing. All of a sudden, we really need to rethink how we interact with the world. There are things that are working, but I'm not sure how fast the user, for example, who has been working with mouse and keyboard for their entire lives, the Leap Motion, for example, works in it. There's marvelous things working with it, but the adoption, I think they thought it would be adopted a lot quicker. It doesn't seem to be like that is the case. What do you see as the main challenge in user interaction with the world right now? What is the thing that you want to pull out your hair and
So I think we do have a lot of challenges when we talk about moving into more of a VR space. One thing I've noticed is just for every company, when you think about how do you move in the world, how do you walk in the world, I don't think anyone's actually solved this well. And I mean, on the bright side, this is an industry challenge. It's not a Linden Lab specific challenge. It's something everyone kind of needs to work out and standardize. I think we'll get there. We're not there today. If you gave someone a Wiimote 10 years ago or 20 years ago, what would they do? They wouldn't necessarily know. So it's a matter of kind of like figuring out the right paradigms and being able to really experiment and test until we find something that feels fairly intuitive and then kind of going ahead with that. And as that standardizes, I think it will become second nature to people. Like we talk about the mouse and keyboard. A keyboard isn't second nature to people. It's something you learn. It's a skill. So as long as we start standardizing on skills and kind of areas, I think over time it will feel more intuitive.
But you do have to then really kind of look closely what the others are kind of working on. And so I suppose you also have to kind of test things. Sometimes I imagine you guys have like this entire room full of stuff, which I know isn't true because I haven't seen it. But maybe Ebbe, last time I was there, he locked the room up and didn't show me. But maybe you do have like all these different treadmills there, like the Cybereth and whatnot. And
I mean, we do have a number of toys we experiment with, and I'm not saying what we have. We do try different hardware experiences over time because, we have to understand where the industry is going. It's a balance, though. If you think about somebody who has a complete VR setup with a treadmill and cameras and everything in the room, that's not going to be your average user, at least not for some time. So while we do want to kind of future-proof and build for a future for a product that, hopefully will be around 10, 20 years from now, just like Second Life, we also want to think of what users are going to have today. So what are they going to have in terms of a setup that they can actually use? Because if we design for something that was kind of like a crazy futuristic experience, that would benefit maybe 1% of our users. And again, we really want to think about who we're designing for.
That is something that I'm also a little skeptical that everybody and their grandma will have a full setup sort of in the living room. I think that's kind of I've heard some people express that at some of these conferences, so I think that's kind of a pipe dream. And I also think, as a VR enthusiast myself, I think even if you have it, you're not going to use it all the time, right?
I think that's another thing that kind of is yet to be determined. And it's something that maybe will help determine, but it's also something that the industry and people themselves need to determine. So we don't know how long people want to put on a headset. That's something no one in the industry knows. We think it will get better as people experience less motion sickness, as the experiences get better, as the products get better, but we don't really know. People talk about this futuristic vision of like, oh, it's like Snow Crash, oh, it's like Ready Player One. Everyone wants that at some point, or at least that to be an option, but we really don't know what the initial paradigm is. Like, it might be something you use for a half hour or an hour at a time, and then you go back to your computer to use it then. We don't know yet. We expect it's going to change over time, and I think what we see on these early versions will kind of be an indicator, but they won't be where we end up.
So that's also something, you sound to me like that's something where you go like, it would be a waste of energy and productivity kind of completely worry about this stuff all the time right now at this point, right?
There's some things we can figure out on our own, and there's some that it's an industry challenge. So it's a hardware challenge. It's a challenge that, needs to be collectively solved. And it's also something we're going to kind of look at data-wise. So like, how long are people using headsets with our first version? Like, how long do people switch into that? Once we start getting more data about how people actually use it, then we can make better decisions.
Are you saying with the testing, do you actively test at this point with the small alpha group also their behavior, or do they have to do surveys?
I don't know how much we can comment on our current status, but if we talk about something like data-driven development, this is a very common phrase in technical companies, but the idea is you kind of look to the data to indicate how our users behaving. It doesn't mean you're spying on an individual user or you're like tracking exactly what they're doing, but it means you're tracking general patterns of behavior, so you have a little bit of an idea. So you can complement that with all the like anecdotal one-on-one feedback you get, but also just understanding what does it look like from a data perspective? What does it look like from talking to users one-on-one? Where is the actual story of how people are behaving?
That's the end of all privacy. If I wanted to be there with my goggles for 10 hours, then you know exactly. And then an automated voice will say, Draxter, why are you not using your goggles anymore? Do you feel dizzy? Oh, there's so many dystopian things. And last time I spoke to Philip Rosedale, and I said, "Are you worried about sort of the dystopian angle of things?" And he said, "Yeah, this is only in books. It's never going to be in reality." I disagree with him on that completely. I think there's always a chance of anything going both ways. But anyway.
Yeah, user privacy is absolutely important, and you need to figure out ways to kind of protect that individual user. I think more and more looking at how people use products is common, and you really benefit from that. For example, if there's a bunch of buttons in the product you are never actually clicking, if we're able to remove those, it makes your experience that much better and that much easier. So as a user, you benefit when we look at data. Again, there's fine lines. You really have to be a responsible steward of data and make sure you're not kind of using it for evil.
Linden Lab, I think, has, in the grander scheme of things, and Ebbe has expressed as much with the avatar identity and all that, actually a really nice positioning in this world where they can accommodate people who are not necessarily happy with the Facebook model of things, where it's all just real names and then nothing else. So a very narrow look at identity, and I think... and I hope that Linden Lab will sort of, put that into the offering. Look, guys, if you're not happy with having sort of everybody knowing what you ate for breakfast, we have this world for you where you have much more playful sort of agency over identity.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to really think about not just anonymity, but like who you want to be and letting people define themselves and really letting people shape the product around what they want it to be. I think there's a real sense in Project Sansar that we've learned a lot from Second Life about how different people use the product. And we really want to enable people to kind of have similar experiences in a new way.
What can you say to people who still say, well, I'm going to be waiting for Second Life 2.0, and they mean Project Sansar. And I don't understand, because it's been well communicated by Ebbe and others that Project Sansar is not Second Life 2.0. It is probably something very different. There might be an overlap in markets. But what can you say, of course, without revealing, spilling any type of beans that we cannot spill? In what sense will it be different or complementary?
Yeah, so there's a lot of similarities in that we've learned a lot from our experience with Second Life. And so I understand why people will say Second Life 2.0, because they see Second Life, they see the same company, they see us doing something kind of in a similar space, and they say, oh, it's the same thing. There's a lot of things you do in Second Life you'll also be able to do in Project Sansar, but we don't think they're necessarily the same or exclusive. We think there's different use cases you'll see in both. We think we're tailoring, I think, a little bit more to kind of niche groups and understanding some more of that diversity and allowing people to have very different experiences in Project Sansar.
As a fan of the metaverse, I just want this thing where I can hop from world to world and keep my identity.
What we really want to think about is, if you are a person, how do you interact in different spaces, and how do you define your different spaces that you'd interact in? We want you to have your experience going to Berlin, going to Munich, and being you, but we also want to represent a world where someone else can, have a very different vision and a very different experience and still accomplish it through Project Sansar. You could think of an example of like an architect. An architect may just want to go in, they may want to prototype spaces, they may want to do it with a client and walk through with that. That's a very different experience from somebody who wants to attend a support group or go to a club and socialize. We want all of those experiences to kind of exist in parallel, and you to be able to define yourself however you want. So you should be able to say, I'm interested in these things. This is the persona I want to have.
And a role-playing community could then, for example, restrict or kind of mandate that when you come into this pirate community, you got to kind of dress up a certain way, obviously, so that the creator of that world would have that control over who comes in. I mean, is that kind of the concept, I suppose?
We are thinking a lot about kind of control and how you do that. I don't want to talk too much about specifically how it's going to be implemented, but again, I'll go back to the example of the architect because it's very, very easy to use. He may be very specific about who he wants in his space. If he's building a brand new skyscraper, he may only want his clients and his other like architectural people to come in, and he may really care about what they actually wear in the space. We want to allow him to have that control.
I want you to spill beans, but I'm not going to press this further. You guys at Linden Lab had recently a gathering of the women in VR. You gave the space to them, and they had a meeting. Let's talk a little bit about women in technology. There's a lot of talk about that. It almost has, I mean, it's kind of parallel, women in Hollywood and then women in tech. Women in Hollywood is more about equal pay. Women in tech is about girls are not encouraged at the at the very beginning even to pursue anything in that arena. Take it where you will. How did you get into there? Was it hard? Is there a stigma? How does it feel to play in this good old boys club?
The first thing I'd say that we can talk about issues of gender and being a woman in tech, but I also think it's part of a bigger talk around diversity in technology. So how do you have people of different races, different ages, different sexuality? How do you have different socioeconomic backgrounds? Like all those things really play into having a compelling group. I really believe in the phrase diverse teams build diverse products. And I think we're really fortunate here at Linden that we have a really diverse team. We have a lot of different people. And I think that helps us kind of keep the user in mind and keep different user experiences in mind. But that's not the background you always experience. And the example I like to think of is when I was in college, I worked at a desk doing technical support. I actually led a team. I had, a number of teammates doing technical support. However, when I stood at that desk, I'm a blonde girl. I would have Indian guys reporting to me. If people had a technical question, they'd always do a double take. They'd always look at me and then go to the Indian guy. And it was nothing wrong with him. But he would escalate questions to me. It was not a situation where he actually knew more, but there was an implicit assumption that he did. And I think when you have small interactions like that thousands of times, it actually changes you. It makes you assume you're less good at things. It actually gives you less opportunities for learning. So I think it's a small thing that just having conversations about and really being aware of your unconscious biases. I definitely recommend, if anyone out there is interested, please read up on unconscious biases and kind of see how you might be interacting with people in a way you don't really expect. I think the first step is definitely just awareness, and then starting the conversation from there. I mean, everyone has unconscious biases. It's not a thing you should feel ashamed about, because it's just a natural factor of human psychology. It's how we learn to deal with the world. However, once you acknowledge them, once you realize what you're doing, it can help you be a little bit more aware and make better decisions and be less influenced by them.
Obviously, you didn't internalize the stereotype that was put upon you. You made it all the way to Linden Lab.
I mean, it's true. I've worked at other technical companies before, and I've had great experiences, and I've also had an experience where somebody told me something was technical, sweetie. So it's the type of thing where, yes, you do kind of have awareness, but every day you kind of have to check yourself and realize where you're at. And again, I can talk to it as a woman, but this goes across a large spectrum of diversity issues. I don't think anyone tends to have malintent in these things, or at least very few people have malintent. It's more about what they're doing because they don't realize they're doing it.
Absolutely.
I have a number of friends who are Black female engineers, and people don't assume they're technical. I mean, I have the problem that I go out and people go like, oh, you work in marketing, right? I kind of laugh at that, but I have a friend she would always be assumed she was on the janitorial staff. And she was an accomplished engineer. And I don't think it's something anyone ever directly tried or consciously did, but it's just something that they have to deal with. And when you do, it kind of changes your perception. So again, I think just talking about these things, creating awareness, and generally being able to bring these to the forefront of a conversation helps a lot with diversity.
Come on, Trilo. Life is not easy for men. You make it out that we're just stereotyping women all the time. It's very hard for men.
And it's not. This is not a male problem to solve, right? It's a female problem too. Women probably have the same bias. I probably look at other women and probably tend to assume they're less technical too. And that's coming from someone who really cares about this issue. I'm sure I make small assumptions that are incorrect. And I just think it's really important to acknowledge, hey, we have these default tendencies. Then what can we do to fight against them?
In closing, what would you then recommend to young women, girls?
As far as what I'd say for young women, I think the important thing is figure out what motivates them and then help them learn and help them do that. I think there's been a lot of important research that says people learn when they're motivated by the right things. Personally, the first time I picked up coding was when I was making websites for hobbies and learning how to do that because I really wanted to accomplish something. I think when you give young girls, when you give women opportunities to really build things they want to do, I think they're more likely to pick up the technology. I'm really excited with VR in particular because I think there's a whole swath of new opportunities, of new interaction that can kind of inspire women to get more involved in VR and technology.
And what is fascinating is that there's a lot of research about how Second Life, for example, empowered women, or women are more active in Second Life. I don't know if there's any current statistics available, but it makes so much sense in the combination of sort of the identity, agency over the identity, and sort of that space where you can be entrepreneurial and you're not being judged by these parameters. And then in VR, and Project Sansa could be another place where women could be entrepreneurial and successful.
Yeah, I mean, if we wanted to start getting into women in business, I think there's also plenty of trends there that there's not enough spaces for women to be entrepreneurs. You look at it, tech companies, there's very few women founders. There's not as many women founded startups, and that's despite a number of them doing quite well. So any way we can kind of enable more women to succeed in technology and business, I think is really exciting. And I'd love to see a ton of women and men and diverse groups on Project Sansar.
All right, that was Trilobite Linden, who works with Project Sansar. And Project Sansar is not SL 2.0, okay? Just repeat that mantra every morning when you wake up. It's going to be different in approach, in concept, and we'll see what happens. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'll be gone next week. I'll be in Dublin at the Web Summit. I'll be bringing back a lot of digital tape for you guys with hopefully interesting interviews. Enjoy the weekend. Make sure to watch, which also just came out as you probably listen to this show, or maybe 2 hours after you listen to the show, because there's a 2-hour gap between the podcast and the new Drax Files World Makers video, episode 33, about virtual Luxembourg, Fort Tüngen. Really fascinating story that I hope, should resonate with people who have no clue what virtual worlds are and what virtual reality is. At least I tried to document it that way. So grab that video, share it with that cranky uncle of yours who thinks the world is going to hell in a handbasket with all this technology stuff. And he probably says that while he's watching daytime soaps. Anyway, sorry, stereotypes. I love them. You love them. And thanks for listening. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.
The Drax Files Radio Hour with Joe Yardley is a weekly production of Basic Drax Entertainment. The show is supported by Maven Homes, Giza Creations, Botanical, Strawberry Sing, Abranimations, Arrows Avatars, Caravel Design, Avacon, Cube Republic, Fateware by Damien Fate, the Avazines Publication Family, What Next, Bright Canopy, Dutchy Furniture, Landscapes Unlimited, Dwarfins, The Den, Following Gods Incorporated, Feroce SL, Giant Snail Races every Saturday, Kona Stream, and Death Row Designs. Contact the show via Skype, Drax Files, Avatar Drax Files, or email radio@draxfiles.com.